Hi and welcome to Squiz.com, the connected marketplace. Today I'll be showing you the newest changes we've made to the Squiz.com connector software in the 1.23 release. Squiz.com connector is a free piece of software developed by us that allows a business to connect any of its business software, databases, spreadsheets, or files storing data into the Squiz.com and Todex platforms, allowing businesses to save and make more money by automating data management and transfer between its systems and other supplier and customer systems. Now you understand what the connector can do, let's look at the latest changes made to the connector in the 1.23 release. This release adds the new ability to manage location data set up within the connector's datasets feature. This enables physical geographical locations such as stores, warehouses, offices, sites, or any other place you can think of to be defined within a dataset. Additionally, you can assign products to locations and specify the amount of product stock that exists at each location. This data is very useful for location-based searches within the Todex and Squiz.com platforms that enables customers to find products based on their location. It can be also used for people to just define locations themselves, such as stores, outlets, suppliers, or dealer networks using a location finder. Also within the datasets feature, we've added the ability to set the ordering and IsActive fields against product images. This allows more control over which images should display and how images are sorted when displayed in a list within the Todex and Squiz.com platforms. This release adds a new routine to the connector's generic adapter called import unimported sales orders. This routine will find any sales orders that have landed in the connector that haven't been imported into a connected business system yet. Then try to import those orders. The routine enables a store and forward mechanism for sales orders, where several orders can land in the connector first, then at a later stage be pushed to a connected business system in batch. This situation is particularly useful in business systems that are slow to import each sales order, especially large orders, or its connectivity to that system is unreliable. The routine may also be used as a backup to ensure no sales orders are left behind in the connector when infrequent outages occur with a business system. The release adds a number of improvements to the Generic Adaptor's JSON XML CSV web service files data source type and its query browser. There is now a setting that allows data to be read from a CSV spreadsheet file when the CSV data contains no header row. Normally the first row of a spreadsheet file would contain the names of the data columns. But if this is missing, then this setting will treat the first row as containing data. This is very handy if the data is coming from a system that does not set any header row information. This data source type is now also able to support retrieving data from web-based systems when the data needs to be retrieved over multiple page requests. And each page of data contains an identifier to get the next page of data. This is relevant for a business system such as NetSuite, where it uses a unique identifier for each type of data search in its system to obtain data. The generic adapter also gets a new text case JSON XML CSV field function that enables text data coming from web-based systems or files to have the text case changed, enabling text to be converted to uppercase, lowercase, or title case. This is helpful to provide clean and consistent text data being displayed in connected platforms. If that's not enough, this release includes a number of small improvements and bug fixes that can be read in the connector's version history. As always, feel free to subscribe to the Squiz.com YouTube channel to stay informed when we release new great functionality in the future. For now, let's get into the detail of the latest changes made to the connector. Within the Connector 1.23 release, we've modified the datasets feature to have the additional ability to manage location data. Now, this data is typically used in location finders, such as an example here, where you can see a list of locations, and you may have a map in that location finder showing all the different locations that may exist for your organization, and then you've also got filters to be able to do that. So in order to set up these list of locations, we can use the datasets feature within the Connector application to manage the location data. So within the connector under the datasets tab, if you create a new dataset or you use an existing dataset and you view that. Now, if you have an existing dataset, you'll need to update that dataset. So we click the yes button to make that possible. Click the start upgrade button. Now that upgrades to the latest version 1.7. And then if we click the view button, you can now see there is a location button where you can now create locations or import locations into a dataset, as well as then assign products to those locations and indicate their stock quantities. So within a location, there are a number of fields where you can set information about a location. So the first one is the key location ID. That needs to be a unique identifier of a location. So we'll give it an identifier of 1. The location code is a code that allows that location to be found. So we could have a location code of LOC1, then the actual name of the location, which may be displayed to users. So if we're a business that may have stores, we might have the name of the store in this location. So if we only had one store in Melbourne, we might call it the Melbourne store. And then we can, in the address fields, we need to put in the details of the address, just as I've done here. And then we've got these latitude and longitude. So based on the type of location that this is, if it's a physical location, that's a location that exists somewhere in the world, then it will have geographic coordinates about where it exists. So in Google Maps, we can find the latitude and longitude of a given location just by going to the map, right-clicking on the map and clicking on the what's here, and then that will give you the coordinates of that location. And then if you click on them, you can copy the latitude and longitude data from Google Maps itself. So we'd put in the latitude here and the longitude there. Now within the location type field, we can enter one of the values as defined within the e-commerce standards. So we can set either warehouse, store, site, or office. So in this case, this may be a store that we are setting. And then we may have a contact that's a primary contact of that store, who manages that store. And then we could put in the phone number for that store. It could be a local phone number or it could be a global phone number, such as a 661 number. And if it's old school, we can also put in a fax number, and it may also have an email address. And that store itself may also have its own website. So we put that into that field. A location can denote if it's a geographical location, so we put in the value Y or yes, if it is geographic, but a location may be a non-geographic location. So it may be a virtual or abstract location. You may have a location or a sub-location within a building, or this location may represent a computer system. So only if it physically exists in the world would you put it to yes, otherwise you would set it to a value of N, meaning no. And then we can set whether or not this location is active and has been updated and put any notes against this location as we're going through. So we could create locations that represent stores that we own, or they could be stores of our customers that we are on selling products to, or they could be stores of our suppliers. We can also put them in the list. It's up to you how many stores you want to list for your organization. And as we go through, we can continue to create new identifiers for these stores as we go down the list here. So we've also got these search filters. So you may, if you've got a lot of locations, then we can then also find locations based on the different fields. So we may want to find all the locations in Melbourne. So we just type that and click the find button, and that's going to find any locations that have the text Melbourne within the address to field. And because we're using the contain, we don't have to have an exact match. So we could have a thing that says it's got the word Mel in its name, or even L in its name, it will then come up. And if we clear that field, then you get the full list again. Now, once you've got your location set up, then within the location products quantities tab, we can now then start assigning products to locations. So in this case, we're selling spring water. So we need to get the unique identifier of each of the locations where that water may be sold or may be stored within. So we grab the location that exists in, and then we can see that it has now been assigned, and we have now the ability to set the different quantities of this stock of this product that exists at that location. So there may be 10 of those products at that location. Quantity on hand means is how many of those products are actually available to be picked for at that location. Quantity orders is how much stock quantity has been ordered at that location for that product. Quantity orderable is how much stock is allowed for future orders to be ordered from that. So we may have 3 that are on hand, but there's maybe only 2 that are allowed to be orderable, and we might want to have always 1 spare at that location. Quantity back orders means we've previously gone out of stock, and then we've actually started to back order that stock from a supplier. So there may be actually 10 of that product that is being ordered in from a supplier. Quantity reserved is like we were saying before, you might want to have 1 quantity of that product reserved, so that way it cannot be ordered or picked or packed by any future orders. And consigned is that the products at that location have actually been consigned out to other places. So there might be 5 of those products that have been consigned out to, say, other dealers or stores. So those are the fields available, and each time you assign a location in these grayed out fields, you can see the location that this product has been assigned to. And we can also set whether or not these records are active and updated and put any notes against them. Now, if you want to assign this product to multiple locations, now let's just go back to locations and create, say, a warehouse location. So we have a second location here called our New South Wales warehouse. So we'll get the key identifier of that. And back within the location products.quantities table, if we click on the insert key, what you'll see is that this product line has now been duplicated, and now we can assign this product to a second location. So we put the unique identifier of that location, and then once it's found that location, we can now set the quantities that are now available there. And then we can verify that by seeing that that location is assigned to, it's found the correct location. So we can keep going through and doing this, assigning our products to locations. Now, in many enterprise resource planning systems, you would not have to do all this manual data work within the dataset itself, but if you're working with smaller accounting-based systems or warehouse management systems, you may not have the ability to set up the locations there. So this is where the datasets really is an add-on. It allows you to set up data that may not exist within other systems. But we can import data from other systems into a dataset. For example, in an enterprise resource planning system, we may have all the fields to set the addresses, but we may not have fields in that system to set the latitudes and longitudes. So that's where we can import data into the dataset, and then we can then add additional information to that existing data and then export it out to the relevant e-commerce platform. So that's where this becomes really powerful. And same for the location product stock quantities. Typically in most enterprise resource planning systems, you would be assigning your product stock to the different locations there, and it would automatically be determining the quantities available based on the stock that you're bringing into the business and the purchases that you're making. But if your business system does not have that capability, then you can use datasets in order to assign your products to the different locations. So if we wanted to import additional set of locations into this dataset, we have that capability. Back within the connector, we would need to have an adapter set up to import from the relevant system that is storing that location data, or it could be also a file which is storing that data. So I've already pre-set up a generic adapter in the connector for the Quickie-Mart organization I have here. And in this case, it's getting a spreadsheet file, maybe from one of its systems. In the settings of the adapter for the data exports, within the locations data export, it's now reading from a spreadsheet file, which looks like this. And what we're going to do is use the connector to import the data from the spreadsheet file into the datasets file. So back within the adapter, we go to exports routines. We find the locations export. We click on the connected dataset that we want to import that into. We want to do a full import. That means that it will inactivate any locations that don't exist in the data where it's coming from. If you're wanting to combine data from multiple sources, then you would typically run incremental data imports instead. So we choose the dataset that we want it to go into. So we're going to put it into our inventory dataset and click the run once off button. So now that it has completed, and we can see within the connectors logs that it is now successfully imported into the dataset. So if we go back to the datasets and open it up and click the Find Reload Data button, we can now see that there has now been a third location that has been added, and it also has now overridden the first two locations because it has found a location with the same key location ID. So that's why it has happened there. So we can see all the locations which were now that stayed active because they were matched with the data coming from the data source, in this case the CSV file. And we can see the locations that failed to update and became inactive because they didn't exist in that spreadsheet file. So typically you would set up your adapters to automatically export the data from the relevant system. So in this case, I'm using a generic adapter, but we could easily export from any of the other systems that are listed here, or using a preset using the generic adapter, import them into the dataset and configure them there. And then we can export the data from a dataset. So we need to set up a generic adapter to pull the data out of the dataset. So I've got an example here called spreadsheet products. Within there, in the data exports, we can then need to configure the locations data export, assign it to a dataset, so a dataset source that finds the SQLite database that the data sits within for the location data. Once that has been configured within here, we can assign it to that data source. And the table that we want to get the location data out from is called location. And we would set a condition typically to get only the active locations. So that way we don't want any locations that are set as inactive. And besides that, we also then need to configure all the fields. So we can hold down the shift key, select the first cell, and then select the last one, and then click the Control and C characters together. And then we need to choose which fields we want to then export out to our e-commerce platform. So typically you would configure them all up like so. And then we would save those changes. And we need to do the same thing for the location products since we need to get that data out as well. So we'll assign that to the same data set. We need to set the data table as location stock quantity and set the condition to IsActive. only get stock quantities for products that belong to location records. So click the Save Settings button, click it back on the data fields and click the Test Export Query. We can make sure that we've configured it, and then we run that, we can see we're pulling out data as well. So that's all configured up nicely now. Now we can split all that data out from this data set here to the relevant e-commerce platform. So we just need to then once again select the locations export, choose the place where we want to set it to, the Todex or Squiz.com platforms, and then choose to import it as a full import, enabling all that data to be used to display a locator finder, such as in this example, this is for a dealer network of locations. Now, if you want to know more about the datasets feature within the connector, go to squiz.com/docs/connector in a web browser, scroll down and go to the datasets link in the right-hand side. Within the Squiz.com Connector's 1.23 release, we've made an improvement to the datasets feature. So if we open up a dataset, click on the View button, then click on the images, for images that are assigned to products. So we have a couple examples here where we've got some green t-shirts being assigned to a green cotton t-shirt product. There is now a column where we can set an ordering value against the images assigned to the products. And this allows us to set the ordering of how product images should be ordered when they appear in a list. So for example, when this data is imported into a website hosted on the Todex platform, Todex gives the ability to display thumbnails of all the images that are assigned to our products, but we may want to change the ordering of those images, so that way some images come up before others because they're more important. So back within the datasets feature, we can set a numeric value within the ordering field to dictate the order in which these images display in. So I might want this darker green t-shirt image to display before the lighter green. So if I set this a value of 1, and then I set the other image to the value of 2, then we're saying that this has a lower value, so it is going to be more important because Todex platform will order images from the lowest value to the highest value within the ordering field here. So once we've made that adjustment, then back in an adapter, if we then run the product images data export, and that can be done by clicking on the export product images, choosing the platform that we want to import those images into, and then clicking the run once off button. In the associated platform, those values may be updated. From there, then when we reload the page, we can now see that the darker green t-shirt or the darker green image of the t-shirt appears before the lighter green. So this is how you control the ordering of images when they appear in lists within connected e-commerce platforms within the dataset feature using the ordering column. And we've got the rest of the product images fields that also can be set here to be able to set if a product image should export to the corresponding system or if it's active or not, and whether or not it should be the primary image that will display in a large size in the associated platforms. So if that has a value of yes set, then that image will be always come up first. Otherwise, it may depend on the ordering, which determines which image displays first, both within the list as well as in the full view. Within the connector, you would also need to make sure that if you're exporting the fields out using the generic adapter, within the data exports tab, under the product images data export, there is now the ordering and is primary fields available here. So both of them those fields would have to be enabled, and they would have to be set the values in the custom data field definition to ensure that those values get passed along with the other image data that is managed from within the datasets SQLite database. So that's a configuration that you need to be aware of. This feature should make it easier for people who are managing product images to be able to control how those images are sorted in the corresponding platforms that use this value. In the Squiz.com Connector's 1.23 release, we've added a new routine to the generic adapter to be able to handle importing sales orders into a relevant system when those orders have not yet been imported into that system. So within the connector's adapters, when an order lands, it gets assigned to one of the adapters based on how it's configured from the system where the order is coming from. And for each adapter, there is a setting for whether or not we want those orders to be automatically forwarded and imported in the corresponding system where those orders need to go. Now, if this is set to no, then when the sales orders will land, you'll see that these orders will have their rows in white, saying that these orders have not been forwarded on or imported into the corresponding system that they need to go into. Whereas if that setting was set to yes to allow them automatically import, those orders may automatically get pushed through. So what the new capability we have is for orders where they are not imported into the platform, we can have a routine that will run that will automatically try to re-import these orders, these unimported orders, at a specified time in the future. Now there's a couple of reasons why you do this, and that is because the orders themselves may have a large amount of data, and for the systems where the order is importing to, they may be quite slow to import the orders. It could even take more than a minute or two to import the orders. So by having the orders just land in the connector itself and have a routine that then runs later to import those orders into the business system, that routine, it doesn't matter how long it takes to import the orders, as long as they just get imported within a certain time frame, then that's all fine. So this will reduce the issues where if dependent systems that are importing the orders, they need to get a response back to say that the order is successfully imported. If the orders just land in the connector first and they get stored there, then the connector can return a message back to the corresponding system, so the Squiz.com or Todex platforms, and tell them that the order has been handled. And then those systems can go off and make sure that the user is informed of that. So that's why we would use this mechanism. And it could also be because we have unreliable systems. When we're importing the orders, they may not always succeed because those systems may have a hard time. Maybe they've got a lot of load on them. So we may want to import the orders at specific times of the day to avoid these orders getting missed. So if the sales orders land within a generic adapter, so we've got an example here called the donut factory. If we go into the settings button, under the data routines, under the routine type dropdown, there's now import unimported sales order routine to select from. Once you click the create button, we can then give that routine a name. So we could call this import sales orders into the donut factory system. So once we save that button, that will update the routine code. And now we've got a few options of how this routine works. So when the routine runs, we've got the option to be able for it to send out an email report that contains the details of which orders were able to successfully be imported into the platform and which ones were not. So if we change this value of the send report notification email setting to true, then that will say that this routine wants to send out an email containing a report of how it ran. Now we need to specify where we want that email to go to. So we need to specify the to address. So that might be john@example.com. And we can also specify the from address. That might be donuts@example.com. So those are the settings. It's as simple as that. Once you've updated those fields, then we can then run this routine that will then go through and try to import the orders either once off. So if we click on the export routines button against the adapter where that routine was created for and click on the routines tab, we can now see that we will have the routine here called import sales orders into donut factory. And we can choose to run that routine now and it'll go through all the unimported orders assigned against that adapter, or we can choose to have that routine run at a schedule. So we might want to run it once an hour. So every hour it's going to import sales orders into our configured system, and we can set the start time when we want that to begin with. And if we click on the add button, that will now be scheduled and it'll be run once an hour once we click on the reload scheduler, or we can just run the routine once off. In either case, it's going to run and it's going to go through all the orders that are assigned to that adapter and try to import them in. Now for the adapter here, if you click on the settings button, under the data imports, we need to make sure that the sales orders data import has been configured. So in this case, we're going to have these orders just get saved as CSV files in the file system at a location based on the data source that's been configured up. But alternatively, you could tell that the orders to be submitted by different adapters using the data routing. Our donut factory adapter here, this generic adapter, could actually send the sales orders request to my retail manager adapter that we've got here. And we can also do that using data routing, which is another feature of the connector. So under the data imports routing, we can then say we want to import this orders through a different adapter. So there's our my retail manager. We might want to route them. Or we could have this sales orders import by both the adapters, the donut factory's generic adapter, or the My Retail Manager adapter as well. That's what the process and route option is. So when we click the reload data routing, if that was configured, now in this case I don't want to do routing, so we'll leave that off. Now with the generic adapter configured, back in the routines, let's run the import. And so it's going to go through those 5 or 6 orders that we had. And if it all has gone well for that routine once it's finished running, if you go into sales orders, you will now see that those orders are now in green. So we know that those 5 or 6 orders that were previously unimported have now been imported. So we've got all yeses, and we can also look at the logs within the connector itself, and we can see that it has successfully imported those orders because it's telling us there as well and which order numbers were successfully imported. So that's all good. Now you may have the case where the email fails to get sent out. So you may receive an error such as this, or you may receive an error such as the order failed to import. And that's okay, because the next time if the sales order import routine is scheduled to run again, then it'll try to import the order again. So if the corresponding business system that the orders are going into fails, then maybe at a later date it may succeed again. But it's important to get the email reports going out, because that can provide information why orders may fail as well. So in this case, it is saying that it was unable to submit the email, and it's probably most likely because in the adapter we haven't had set up the email settings to enable that adapter to work out which email server is going to be using in order to send the emails out, or the from and to addresses were incorrect as well. So it's important to get these settings right if you're going to use the connector to send out email notifications of this report that has been run. So the import unimported sales order routine is a very powerful and a very handy routine when business systems struggle to import sales orders, and we can use the connector as a store and forward mechanism where sales orders going into it will get stored, and at a later date they will then get forward onto the connected business systems or the different data files or web services where the sales orders are getting pushed onto. So this is a very good routine for backups and redundancy in the case that an order fails to import into a system at a given time. You try to re-import sales orders that would otherwise have been left unimported in the connector. Within the 1.23 connector release, we've made improvements to the generic adapter as well as the JSON XML CSV query browser to be able to query out data from CSV files, which are spreadsheet files, when those spreadsheet files contain no header row that outlines the names of the columns that the data is in. So to show you what I mean, here's a spreadsheet that I've got that stores a list of products outlining the different donuts that the donut factory sells as well as buns. Now, as we can see here, the first row in the spreadsheet here has all the names of the columns that are storing different kinds of data. So we have the description, the first description field that is showing the description of what these products are. We've got a brand field, we've got depth, and so on and so forth. So this allows us to know precisely what data is stored in which column of the spreadsheet. But in some cases, when CSV data is exported from some systems, the first row will not contain the names of the columns. So it's the equivalent of if we have just purely got the data coming out of that system. So within the connector's query browser, as well as the generic adapter, we can now read data from spreadsheet files where the first row contains no column names. Within the connector, if we go to the tools and go to the JSON XML CSV query browser, here's an example of where I've configured the query browser to read from the products spreadsheet file, the CSV file, and we've configured it so that way it can handle the data in the CSV format that's been configured. Now there is a new setting here that needs to be specified whether or not the first row of the spreadsheet contains the headers, that is the column headers, and that can be set to yes or no. So now that I've changed this file, and I'll click the save button to make those changes, and we'll keep it in the text CSV file format. Now, when that occurs, I now need to change this setting to no, saying that the first row does not contain the headers. Now previously we'd specify which columns to get the data out based on using the column name in the spreadsheet file. But now we cannot do that anymore because that data is no longer there. So if we run the query to query out the data from the spreadsheet file, you will see that it is blank because the names of the columns don't match up with the data because there is no column names in the spreadsheet. So what we can do is we can look at the raw data and we can see now when the data comes out of the spreadsheet file, it gets converted into the JSON data format, which is what we're looking at here. And then for each column in the spreadsheet, it is putting the word column and then the number of the column that appears and the row data that appears for each cell within there. So we can see that here that the column numbers just keep going up for the first record, and that's the first record coming out of the being set for the JSON data. And then we can see where the data is. So what we need to do is if we want to use the connector to get the data out of the spreadsheet file, we now need to specify which column contains that data. So we would go through here and say, all right, the stock quantity maybe is the third column, and the barcode may be stored in the sixth column. So if we continue to go down here, and we'll just put in the numbers base, we'd be looking at the spreadsheet to work out which column numbers correlate to the field where that data needs to be stored. So once we click the run query button, we will now see that we can see some data that's coming out of the relevant columns there. So this is how we can mitigate the issue where if the first row of a CSV spreadsheet file contains no names of the header column, we can still extract the data. And to do this, we need to then specify the column number and then which field that correlates to. Besides, within the query browser, this same setting is available in the generic adapter. If we go into the settings, for the JSON XML CSV web service file data source type, so that's a data source type that can either read JSON data, XML data, CSV data, either coming from a web service, also could be called a cloud system, or a file which is stored locally on the computer. If we click on the modify button for that, within here, when the data type is set to CSV, under the CSV text reader settings, there is that same setting called first row contains header. So if we're using this data source type that is returning CSV data, we would also set that to no if the CSV data contain no header names within the first row of the CSV data. So once that setting is changed, then we will do the same thing for the products data export, where as opposed to putting in the name of the field, we instead would be putting in the column number. So the brand may be stored in column 1 of the spreadsheet data, and the description too may be stored in column 5. So we just need to go through and set those numbers there. And we'd also need to make sure that the JSON record set path is set to data records. That's the object within the CSV data that gets created when the CSV data gets converted into a JSON objects. So that value needs to be set there as well as the name of the CSV file where that data is coming from there. Another handy feature to note is that if you click on the tools menu and go back into JSON XML CSV query browser, if you choose the CSV data type and set the CSV text reader setting, the first row contains headers to no, and after that you've put in the path to the CSV file, when you click the run query button, it will automatically generate the fields for you, so you don't even have to type those fields in. It will just magically find them and extract that data, and so that way you can then already see the querying data that is being retrieved out of that file. So that's a very handy feature, rather than having to work out which data is stored in which column and what that column number is. And then once you've got that, then you can then copy these values across into the corresponding field when you're setting up the data export, when it's going to read the data from the file and export it to the corresponding e-commerce platform. So using this feature makes it possible to read data from spreadsheet files being saved from other business systems that contain no column heading information in the first row of the spreadsheet data. Within the Connectors 1.23 release, we've had a small improvement to the generic adapters to the JSON XML CSV web service file data source type, as well as its query browser, to be able to change the way that text is formatted. So if we go back into our query browser, and I'm going to take the previous example of reading in the product data that we've got stored in a CSV spreadsheet file. Within the data coming out of the spreadsheet file, it is going to convert it into a JSON data format. So here's the JSON data format that we can see here. And then because of this, it's in this format, we can use the JSON field functions in order to manipulate that data that is being queried out. So one of the things we've added is a new JSON XML CSV field function. So we can find the list of these field functions within the Connectors Documentation Center. If you go into the Connectors Documentation Center, on the left-hand side, if we scroll down to the JSON XML CSV data field functions, we can get an entire list of all the field functions that are available. And one of those functions that we've added now is called text_case. So if we go down to that section, we can see that there's two arguments that are available for this function. One of them is the actual text that we want to convert to either uppercase, lowercase, or title case, the letters that appear in that input text. And then the second argument is whether or not we want to convert that into all uppercase letters, all lowercase letters, or all title case letters. And on our example data, so if we look at column 7 here, and we'll just remove these other columns just to make this easier to find. So in column 7 here, we can see the text here that it comes out of the CSV file contains a combination of uppercase letters and lowercase letters. Now we may want to convert this all into uppercase or all into lowercase. So using this new function that we have available, we simply type in the word text case or text_case. The first argument we'll put in the name of the column, whether it's the data we want to change from, and then we need to specify how we want to change the case of this. So we can firstly, let's try the upper example. So we're going to convert all those letters that appear in this text here into uppercase. So we click that. We can now see that all that text is now in uppercase, and a similar thing happens when we put the word lower. So that's going to change all the letters coming from our spreadsheet file in that given column that are all now going to be in lowercase. And the last one is title case, where the first letter of each word will be in uppercase, then all other letters in the same word will be all lowercase. So when data is coming from spreadsheet files or web services or files that are storing JSON, XML, or CSV data, all those three different data types, we can now manipulate the text so that it appears in a consistent form, which may make it easier for people to read or ensure that there's no inconsistencies when it displays on web pages. So this is a neat little function that we can then utilize to our advantage when we're setting up integrations with other systems. Within the Connector 1.23 release, we've added another improvement to the generic adapter so that way it can support retrieving data from systems that split up the data across multiple requests, or what we call multiple pages of requests, and each page has an identifier on how to get the next page of data. So to give you an example of what that actually means, if we take our previous example where we're looking at product data that comes in a list of records, such as we have here in this spreadsheet, in some systems, they may split the records that we can retrieve across into multiple sets. In one system, an example system, we only may be able to get the first 4 records of products from that system in one request. And in the second request, we get the second set of records, the next 4 records that happens. So we would call these pages, these blocks of requests that we're doing. So this would be page number 2, and this other page number 1. So in our generic adapter, we can support we're getting product data out of a system that we are only going to expect to get 4 records in each request, and for the first page, and then we need the connector to make another request to get the next 4 sets of records. Now in some systems, they will put in a unique identifier of what the pages need to be. So they may have called this not page number 2, they may call it page ABC 222. So each set of records, the pages may have a page ID as opposed to just a page number. And so in this example, we've got the page ID may be ABC1111, but the next page may have an ID of ABC222. Now, so it's in some systems, they will, as well as returning back the record data in one single request, they will also put in what their next page identifier is. So in this case, it's saying page ABC222. So what that means is that when we make a request to get the next page of data, we know which page we need to retrieve because we put in the page identifier. So with that kind of background knowledge, we can now set it up in the generic adapter to handle this kind of capability. And if we go into the generic adapter, so within the generic adapter under the data export, for a data export that is assigned to the JSON XML CSV web service file, we can see that there is an additional field that now exists that we can configure for a data export that is going to make the request to retrieve the data and then try to determine if the next page needs to be found. So this setting here, next page identifier path, is where we need to specify where we can find the ID of the next page that is coming back in the response data from the system we're getting the data from. If I made up some example data here, this could be how the data could look if we're getting it from a JSON-based web service. This is the data way it may come through. So we've got an object here called data records that contains a list of records, but also we've got some other data here, which is what we're calling metadata. And within the metadata, it contains the next page identifier, so that tells us where we can find the ID of the next page that we need to now embed in the next request. So we need to put in the path on how in the JSON path and how to get access to this data. So in this case, it lives within this top level metadata object. So we would need to put the metadata word there. We need to separate it with a dot to tell us we want to get a child object that is assigned to. It is the attribute called next page identifier. So then we would specify that in the path. So then that allows the adapter to know where it can expect to find the data it needs. And we'd also need to set up the URL. So the data source itself, so make all the name, such as here is we've got example.com, it's an API, and it has then a data folder underneath it. So that may be set there. And then we would put in the endpoint where we're going to get that data from, so it could be products. And so then after we've set the name of the endpoint, we may need to put in different additional parameters. So we'd typically use the question mark to enable these parameters. So one of the things that this endpoint from this fictional web service, we may have a parameter called page ID, maybe it called. And so there's a special hook we can now put in, which is these curly brackets and the word page identifier with the I in uppercase. And then what is it's going to do is it's going to, when the first request comes to retrieve this product data and the response comes back, this next page identifier path will find the ID to the next page. And then for the second request that goes out, then that value will be placed into this hook that is displayed here. And so then the server receiving the request will then know, I've got to get the next set of records for the second page, and that has the ID. In our example here, it would have the ID of ABC222. So this is how we can put in non-numeric page numbers into the URLs to allow us to make requests when one page of data gives us the identifier for the next page of data. And several web services and web systems that exist out there will use this mechanism as opposed to page numbers in order to determine how many records we can get. And normally the reason why this happens is because servers want to reduce the amount of records that they need to return in a single request, because it ensures that they're not trying to do too much work. So this capability that I've talked about here is exactly what is used in NetSuite, which is an upcoming integration that we're doing to enable it to get data out of its web service. And in its specific case, the page identifier doesn't actually change after the first request, but we need to specify that for the additional pages that we get out. And of course, we also need to set up the pagination within the data source type itself. So we would have to set this value here is how many records we expect to get per page. So in our example that we were setting it to 4, where only 4 records are expected per page. If it's set to 0, then pagination won't work. So you're going to make sure that get this value right. And you may need to set up multiple data sources. If the endpoints where the data coming from the web services alters, then you may just need to set up different data source types that have the correct value for the records per page. So this is a very advanced piece of capability that has been built into the connector software to allow it to be very flexible on how this adapter, this generic adapter, can export and retrieve data from a different myriad of different web services that are storing data in the JSON, XML, CSV data formats, and then the amount of data that we can retrieve across multiple requests. And if you've got any more information about these complex subjects, feel free to talk to us at squiz.com in the connector help feeds there, where we can also aid you if you're trying to set this up. And that's a wrap up of the Connectors 1.23 release. If you want to find more information about this release, go to the squiz.com/docs/connector URL. And then on the sidebar, if you scroll down to version history, you can find more information about the 1.23 release and the changes we've made to the connector, as well as the bug fixes and more information there. And if you've got any questions, feel free to comment on the YouTube video or visit the feeds at squiz.com. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Until next time, have a great day.